Somewhere in a museum drawer, behind glass, there is a small jar almost 5,000 years old. Inside, dried to a hard crust, sits a smear of black powder. Some woman ground that powder by hand, mixed it with a drop of water or a little fat, and painted it carefully around her eyes before she stepped out into the morning sun. She has been dead for 50 centuries. And still, chances are, you did a version of the very same thing before you left the house today. That is the quiet secret hiding inside a makeup bag. We like to treat cosmetics as frivolous, as pure surface, as the least serious thing a grown person could possibly fuss over. Yet the urge to paint our own faces runs deeper than almost any custom we have. It predates the alphabet. It predates coins, window glass, and most of the gods that people have ever knelt down to pray to. And across those thousands of years, this ordinary little habit has been used to heal the sick, to honor the dead, to seduce, to lie about age and rank and health, and, in one unforgettable case, to slowly poison a queen. We will come back to that queen. Keep her in the back of your mind, because her ending is one of the eeriest things in this whole story, and I would hate to give it away too early. Begin, instead, where nearly everything about cosmetics begins, on the banks of the Nile. The ancient Egyptians did not invent human vanity. What they did was turn it into a craft, one so precise that the scholars who study it today still sound a little stunned. Long before the last stones of the Great Pyramids were set in place, Egyptians of every rank were lining their eyes with a dark paste. We usually translate its name as kohl. Rich people wore it, and poor people wore it. Men reached for it as readily as women. Priests, farmers, soldiers, even small children walking beside the river, all of them wore that black rim around the eyes. What went into it depended on your purse. A poor family might mix soot with a little animal fat and call it done. A wealthy household could afford something far more elaborate, built around galena, a dark gray ore of lead, ground fine and sometimes blended with crushed pearls or flecks of gold. Alongside the black, Egyptians loved a brilliant green, made from malachite, a copper mineral hauled out of mines in the Sinai as early as 3,000 years before the Common Era. Lips and cheeks got their color from red ochre, an earthy clay softened with water into a paste. Grind, mix, apply. The tools they kept it in, those slender jars and little sticks, look startlingly like the tubes and wands sitting on a bathroom shelf right now. Here is the part that surprises people. For the Egyptians, this was never only about looking good. That heavy line of kohl was also, in their eyes, medicine and armor. The Nile bred flies and infection, and a dark salve smeared around the eye helped keep both at bay. The powder cut the brutal glare bouncing off the water and the sand, the way a modern athlete smears black under his eyes before a game. And it did real work that they could not have measured. Modern chemists who analyzed old kohl found lead salts that fight bacteria, which means that painted eye was quietly holding off the infections that plagued life along the river. On top of all that sat a layer of belief. The lined eye warded off evil spirits, and the so-called evil eye, that envious glance thought to carry a curse. Certain gods were pictured with those same dramatic markings, so to paint your eyes was, in a quiet way, to echo the divine. Beauty, health, and protection, all in a single stroke of black. No wonder the Egyptians were buried with their makeup, palettes, and jars tucked in beside the jewelry, ready to keep using it in the next world. To them, a face was not something you simply owned. It was something you tended, like a garden. From Egypt, the habit traveled, the way good ideas always do. It moved across the ancient world into Greece and Rome, into Persia and India and far beyond. worn by merchants and soldiers and royalty who had never seen the Nile. Centuries later, when European crusaders straggled home from campaigns in the East, some carried the practice of the darkened eye back with them, a small souvenir from a distant world. As it spread, though, an idea latched onto makeup that would haunt it for the next 2,000 years. That idea was simple, and it was poisonous. Pale skin meant status. Think about why. If you were rich, you did not labor, outdoors under the sun. You stayed in the cool shade of a fine house while other people sweated in the fields. So, a pale, unblemished face became a kind of billboard that announced you did not have to work for a living. The Greeks chased that look with a white powder they called Shameful, and the ugly ingredient at its heart was lead. Romans followed with lead-based paints of their own. Century after century, from one empire to the next, women and plenty of men spread poison across their skin in the name of looking noble. And the whiter the fashion demanded, the more poison went on. Which brings us at last back to our queen. Her name was Elizabeth I, and she ruled England for 45 years, through an age so dazzling that historians named the whole era after her. In the year 1562, when she was still young, she nearly died of smallpox. She survived, but the disease left her face scarred. For a monarch whose power leaned heavily on the image of a flawless, almost godlike queen, those scars were a problem she could not tolerate. So she reached for the most sought-after cosmetic in Europe, a skin whitener known as Venetian ceruse. Ceruse was luxurious, expensive, and adored by aristocrats across the continent, prized because it laid down the palest, smoothest finish money could buy. It was also, we now know, one of the most dangerous substances ever sold as beauty. The recipe was almost obscenely simple. You took white lead and you mixed it with vinegar. The queen powdered her face and her neck with it until her skin looked like porcelain, and the effect at court was exactly what she wanted. The problem was that lead does not stay on the surface. It seeps in. Over the years, it went to work on her. The lead corroded her skin and thinned her hair. As her face grew worse, Elizabeth did the only thing the logic of the makeup allowed. She painted on more, thicker and thicker, to hide the very damage the paint itself was causing. By the end of her life, she was reportedly wearing a layer close to an inch deep. And ceruse was not the only culprit. Her signature red lips came from cinnabar, a mineral loaded with mercury. Her makeup remover, the stuff meant to clean all this off, could itself contain mercury. Slowly, invisibly, two different metal poisons were accumulating in her body. Mercury poisoning gnaws at the mind as much as the body. It can bring memory loss, irritability, and deep depression. And in her final years, the queen showed exactly those signs. She grew frail and low. She sank into gloom and would not keep a mirror in any of her rooms. When she died in 1603 at the age of 69, she had lost much of her hair and most of her teeth. We cannot prove the makeup killed her, in part because Elizabeth forbade an autopsy on her own body. But the pattern is hard to ignore. And here is the detail that always stays with me. Roughly 30 years after she was gone, ceruse was finally reclassified for what it truly was: a poison. It took the better part of a lifetime, and who knows how many quiet deaths, for the world to admit that the cost of that porcelain face was the face itself, and sometimes the woman behind it. You would think a scandal like that might have ended the whole business. It did the opposite, and it took longer to fade than you might guess. Even a century and a half later, fashionable women like Georgiana, the Duchess of Devonshire, were still slathering their skin with lead, chasing the same deadly ideal. When beauty and status get braided together this tightly, warnings tend to lose. So how did we travel from a queen painting herself to death to a world where anyone can buy mascara for pocket change at the corner store? That road turns out to be far stranger than the poison, and it runs straight through a surprising place. Before makeup could become an everyday thing, it first had to become a shameful one. Hold that thought, because the fall comes before the rise. By the 1800s, the mood had flipped hard. In respectable circles, obvious makeup was no longer a mark of nobility. It had become a mark of disgrace. A proper lady was supposed to look naturally lovely, untouched, as if beauty simply happened to her. Visible cosmetics belonged, in the popular imagination, to two kinds of women, actresses and prostitutes, and in the minds of many the line between those two was thin. To be caught wearing paint was to invite a very particular judgment about your character. But the wanting never went away. It just went underground. Women pinched their cheeks to redden them and bit their lips for color, since a pinch left no evidence the way a pot of rouge did. They brewed quiet little remedies at home, tinting their skin with berry juice or a whisper of powder, and they used them behind closed doors where no one could pass judgment. A whole era of beauty happened in secret, unspoken and unadmitted. The desire burned as bright as ever. It simply had nowhere respectable to live. And an appetite that strong, penned up that tightly, was bound to break loose the instant someone handed it permission. Permission arrived, of all places, from a beam of light in a darkened room. The movies. At the turn of the 20th century, a new kind of star was being born on the silver screen, and those faces, blown up huge in front of hushed audiences, needed makeup that could survive the harsh lights of a film set. Into that gap stepped a Polish immigrant born Maximilian Factor. In America, his name got shortened at Ellis Island to something plainer and punchier. Max Factor. He set up shop in Los Angeles just as Hollywood was catching fire, and he built a special makeup for the movies, a flexible grease paint that moved with an actor's face instead of cracking under the lights. It transformed how stars looked on film. Then, Factor did something even smarter. In 1920, he began selling to the public. Suddenly, an ordinary woman could walk into a drugstore and buy a little piece of the glamour she had just watched on screen. She could wear, quite literally, the same look as her favorite star. The word he helped popularize for all of this, makeup, is the very word we still use. He took the magic of the movies and handed it to everyone. He was not working alone in reinventing the business. Two extraordinary women were building empires of their own at the same time, and they despised each other for decades. The first reinvented herself completely. She was born Florence Nightingale Graham on a farm outside Toronto, not wealthy, not connected. She moved to New York, learned the trade in someone else's salon, and in 1909 she gave herself a new name that sounded like money and grace. Elizabeth Arden. She opened elegant salons, trained in Paris, and sold not just products, but a feeling of refinement. One line credited to her sums up her whole ruthless philosophy. "There are no ugly women," she said, "only lazy ones." Her great rival came out of Poland by way of a hard road, and her name was Helena Rubinstein. She opened salons too, invented the pampering ritual she called a day of beauty, and understood marketing in her bones, from the uniforms on her staff to the luxury of her packaging. She was sharp about money in a way few people were. She sold her company in 1928 for more than $7 million, watched the stock collapse when the Great Depression hit, quietly bought it all back for a fraction of the price, and rebuilt it into a fortune. Arden and Rubinstein spent their careers circling each other like duelists, and between them they dragged cosmetics all the way back into respectability, this time as a symbol not of scandal, but of sophistication. And then there is my favorite origin story of the bunch, because it started with a kitchen accident. In 1915, in Chicago, a young woman named Mabel was cooking when a small fire singed off her eyebrows and lashes. To fix the damage, she mixed up a homemade paste of coal dust and petroleum jelly and brushed it onto what was left, darkening her eyes back into shape. Her 19-year-old brother, Tom Lyle Williams, watched her do it and saw something the rest of the world had missed. Skin cream, rouge, and lip color already sold well, but eye makeup had been almost entirely ignored. So he took his sister's kitchen trick, cleaned it up with a chemistry set, and built a product around it. He needed a name. He took his sister's name, Mabel, and he blended it with the petroleum jelly that started it all, a brand called Vaseline, and he stitched the two together. Maybelline. A cake mascara followed in 1917, and over the coming years the company sold it cheap, sometimes for as little as a dime, which meant that for the first time, eye makeup was not a luxury at all. It was something a working girl could afford on a Tuesday. That little company, founded on a cooking mishap, would eventually be bought by the French giant L'Oréal, decades later, for $660 million. Once cosmetics were cheap, respectable, and everywhere, culture ran with them. After the First World War, the flappers kicked the old rules to the curb with dark-rimmed eyes and defiant red lips. During the Second World War, lipstick took on a meaning nobody expected. Governments and companies framed it as a patriotic duty, a small daily act of morale and defiance, a way of saying that life and beauty went on even under bombs. Women in the military were expected to keep their lips colored. Beauty companies answered with bold, brick red shades designed to match the trim of a uniform, so that a single tube of lipstick became a small emblem of the war effort. As millions of women poured into factories and offices to fill the jobs men had left behind, Max Factor rolled out a smoother, less messy foundation called Pancake, built for a woman who needed to look composed and then get straight to work. Makeup was quietly becoming something new. Not just glamour, but part of the working uniform of ordinary life. And when wartime rationing swallowed up the ingredients for mascara, some women simply improvised, reaching for shoe polish and petroleum jelly to darken their lashes, refusing to give up the ritual even when the supply chain gave out. That stubbornness tells you something. This was never really about frivolity. It was about identity. And people do not surrender their identity easily, which carries us to today and to a business almost too big to picture. The global cosmetics market is now worth well over $400 billion a year. Think about that arc. A black powder ground by hand on a riverbank has become one of the largest industries on the planet. And the story is still turning. For most of the last century, that industry quietly assumed one kind of face, one narrow band of skin tones, and left everyone else to fend for themselves at the makeup counter. That assumption cracked in 2017, when the musician Rihanna launched her brand, Fenty Beauty. She opened not with a handful of shades, but with 40 of them. A range built so that women with the deepest skin and the fairest skin could finally find themselves in the same product line. The response was so overwhelming that the industry gave it a nickname, the Fenty effect. Within a few years, more than 80% of the big beauty companies had scrambled to widen their own shade ranges, because a narrow lineup suddenly looked not just outdated, but indefensible. It took 5,000 years, but the makeup counter is finally starting to reflect the actual range of human faces. The story is not finished, and it is not tidy. Even after Fenty, the makeup counter can still fail people. Not long ago, a young woman filmed herself searching a drugstore for a foundation dark enough to match her skin and walking away with nothing. And the clip spread everywhere precisely because so many people knew that exact sting. Progress in this business has always come in fits and starts, one shade at a time. underneath it all, the industry keeps circling back to the oldest worry of them all: safety. Regulators now cap how much lead is even permitted to linger in a cosmetic, a limit that would have sounded like pure fantasy to Elizabeth I. Shelves overflow with jars stamped clean, natural, and pure, though those soothing words carry far less meaning than the packaging would like you to think. In our own modern way, we are still haggling over the very same bargain the Queen once struck, weighing the face we want against the price we are willing to pay to wear it. The biggest shift of all, though, is about power. About who gets to decide what a beautiful face even is. For most of the last 100 years, a small cluster of companies and a few movie studios made that call on everyone's behalf. Now, a teenager with a phone and a loyal following can spark a look that circles the planet in a single weekend. The old gatekeepers have scattered to the wind. In a very real sense, everyone is now their own Max Factor, mixing and testing and broadcasting a personal idea of beauty out to the world. And there is one more circle quietly closing. Remember how it began. In ancient Egypt, men lined their eyes as freely as women. Somewhere along the way, in much of the world, makeup got fenced off as something only women were allowed to want. Now that fence is coming down again. More men are wearing makeup openly, gender-neutral brands are thriving, and the boundaries that felt permanent a generation ago are dissolving. In a strange way, we are drifting back toward where we started, toward a world where painting your face is simply a human thing to do, not a thing reserved for one half of humanity. So let me leave you with the thought I cannot shake. Strip away the marketing and the money and the changing fashions, and every chapter of this story is really about the same small, deeply human moment. A person standing in front of their own reflection, deciding how they want to be seen. The Egyptian woman lining her eyes against the sun and the spirits. The queen hiding her scars under a mask that was killing her. The wartime nurse coloring her lips so the world could not see how afraid she was. The teenager this morning, doing her eyeliner in the front camera of a phone. Different centuries, different powders, exact same impulse. To take the face we were handed and make it, for a moment, ours. To armor up. To become, on purpose, a little more like the person we feel we are on the inside. That is what has always been sitting inside that 5,000-year-old jar. Not vanity, something far older and far more tender than that. If you enjoy pulling apart an ordinary object and finding an entire hidden history folded up inside it, then you are exactly the kind of person this channel is built for. Consider subscribing and giving this video a like, because it genuinely helps these stories reach more curious people like you. And because there are countless everyday things still waiting on the shelf, each one holding a story just as strange as this one. Stick around. The next object might be sitting right there in your own bathroom, hiding a past you never suspected. Next time you catch your own eye in the mirror and reach for something to change what you see, remember that you are joined, across 5,000 years, by every person who ever did the same. It is one of the oldest conversations our species has ever had, and it is still going, one face at a time.